It began with a cry that shattered the stillness of the Collins estate. "Mr. Collins! The baby, something's wrong with the baby." Maven Collins sprinted down the marble corridor, his heart slamming against his ribs. The door to his daughter's nursery stood ajar. When he pushed it open, the world tilted. Deborah John, the maid who had cared for his 1-year-old daughter as if she were her own, lay sprawled on the carpet, motionless. Her dark curls fanned across the floor beside a toppled baby bottle. Tiny Shirley sat beside her, red-faced and trembling, her cries slicing through the air. Toys were scattered across the room. The faint smell of sour milk and medicine hung heavy in the air. Maven dropped to his knees, panic tightening his chest. "Deborah!" he shouted, shaking her shoulder. No response. He turned to Shirley, scooping her up as she whimpered and clutched at Deborah's sleeve. "God, no, please, someone call an ambulance." Footsteps thundered behind him. The butler froze in the doorway, speechless. Maven's gaze darted between the unconscious maid, the crying child, and the spilled bottle. His mind filled in the worst possible truth. A bitter taste rose in his mouth. "What did you do?" he whispered hoarsely, eyes trembling with disbelief. In that moment, grief and prejudice blurred into one unthinkable assumption, and everything that followed was built on that single, devastating mistake. But what Maven Collins didn't know, what no one in that mansion knew, was that minutes earlier, Deborah had been fighting for his daughter's life. But before begin, click subscribe, like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story. The story rewinds to just minutes before the chaos. Downstairs in the quiet study, Deborah John dusted the shelves, her favorite soft hymn humming under her breath. The baby monitor on the side table crackled faintly with Shirley's breathing, a rhythm she had come to know like her own heartbeat. Then, a sound broke through the static. A cough. Another. Then silence. Deborah froze. The feather duster slipped from her hand. "Shirley," she whispered. The next sound, a strangled, choking gasp, sent her running. Her shoes slapped against the marble floors as she sprinted up the grand staircase, breath hitching with every step. When she reached the nursery, her heart stopped. Shirley lay in her crib, her tiny body jerking, lips pale, eyes rolling back. White foam flecked her mouth. "No, no, no, stay with me, baby," Deborah cried, pulling her out of the crib. Her hands trembled, but her training took over. She laid the child on her forearm and tapped sharply between her shoulder blades, coaxing a weak cough. Nothing. She started chest compressions, tiny, precise movements, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Come on, sweet girl, breathe for me." Her eyes darted to the bottle lying on its side, a milky puddle forming beneath it. A sharp, metallic smell filled the air. She lifted it, sniffed, then, desperate, tasted a drop on her tongue. Instantly, her throat burned. The taste was chemical, wrong. Panic flared through her chest. "Poison," she rasped, spitting the liquid out. Her vision blurred as dizziness swept over her. Still, she clutched Shirley close, rocking her, whispering through the haze. "You'll be okay, baby, you'll be okay." The world tilted. The last thing Deborah felt was the warmth of Shirley's tiny hand gripping her collar before darkness swallowed her whole. She collapsed onto the carpet, her arm instinctively curling around the child in one final act of protection. Outside the nursery door, a quiet click echoed, a door closing softly. Rachel Moore, the babysitter, smoothed her hair and walked down the hallway, expression cold and unbothered. By the time Maven Collins would arrive minutes later, only the aftermath remained, chaos, heartbreak, and a truth no one yet saw. The antiseptic scent of the hospital stung Maven Collins's nose as he paced the corridor outside the pediatric wing. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, but his fury burned sharp and alive beneath the exhaustion. A doctor stepped out from Shirley's room, his expression tight. "She's stable now, Mr. Collins," he said. "But tests show she ingested a trace of cleaning solvent mixed into her milk." Maven's breath caught. "What are you saying?" The doctor hesitated. "We also found fingerprints on the bottle, the maid's." Deborah John. Something inside him broke. All the grief he'd buried since his wife's death flooded upward, twisting into rage. "She tried to poison my daughter." His voice echoed down the sterile hallway. Nurses turned. The butler, waiting nearby, lowered his gaze. When Deborah finally stirred in her hospital bed, the first thing she saw was Maven's silhouette framed by the doorway, rigid, cold, unrecognizable. "Sir," she croaked weakly. "Is the baby?" "Alive," he snapped. "Thanks to the doctors." "But you, how could you?" Her pulse spiked. "What? No. I was helping her. She couldn't breathe. Don't lie to me." His voice cracked with something between grief and disbelief. "Your prints were on the bottle." Deborah's tears fell silently. "I only picked it up after she choked." "Enough." Rachel Moore appeared beside him, resting a hand on his arm, her tone soft and poisonous. "I always warned you, sir," she murmured. "You can't trust people like her around your child. You've been too kind." Maven's jaw tightened. Every word pressed deeper into his already broken heart. By the time Deborah sat up, trembling, 2 uniformed guards stood behind her. "Mr. Collins," she whispered, voice shaking. "Please, at least let me see Shirley." "Take her out," he said without looking back. Rain fell hard outside as Deborah was led through the hospital doors, no coat, no umbrella, her tears lost in the downpour. Inside, Maven pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. For the first time since shouting, silence filled the hall. "Sir," the doctor said quietly, glancing at his clipboard, "there's something strange. The maid, she has the same chemical in her system." Maven looked up slowly. Confusion flickered, but the truth hadn't yet found a voice. 3 nights had passed since the hospital, 3 nights of hollow silence broken only by the cries of a child who refused to be comforted. Shirley's sobs echoed through the Collins mansion like a haunting refrain. Each time Maven rushed to her crib, she reached out her tiny hands and whimpered one word that cut deeper than any accusation. "Deba." Maven froze every time. He whispered, "She's gone, sweetheart," though the words tasted bitter. He would pace until dawn, haunted by the image of Deborah's tear-streaked face, her voice insisting she was innocent. By morning, exhaustion gnawed at him. Seeking distraction, he turned to the baby monitor, a piece of technology that had once been a comfort. He loaded the footage from that afternoon, desperate for clarity. The screen flickered, lines of static rolling across it. The file was damaged, nearly unreadable. But one frame held. Rachel Moore, her blonde hair tied neatly, a baby bottle in hand, stepped into the nursery. Maven's brow furrowed. "That can't be right." He replayed it again, and again, each time his heart beating faster. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. A seed of doubt rooted itself in his chest. Could he have been wrong? No, he told himself. Deborah's fingerprints. Her proximity. Her silence. The logic fit, until his conscience whispered otherwise. Later that evening, while searching for one of Shirley's old blankets, he stumbled upon a small leather-bound book in a storage trunk, his late wife Claire's diary. Her handwriting was neat, familiar, almost alive. He flipped through the pages until the final entry stopped him cold. "If anything ever happens to me, trust Deborah. She's the one who knows how to love without condition." The air left his lungs. Claire had trusted her completely. Had he betrayed that trust? He sat in the dim attic light for a long time, the words burning in his mind. For the first time, guilt, real, gnawing guilt, took root. The next morning, he called a digital technician to recover the corrupted footage. The man glanced at the files and nodded. "It'll take a few days, Mr. Collins," he said. "But yes, it can be restored." And for the first time since the nightmare began, Maven felt both fear and hope stirring in the same breath. 2 days later, Maven sat alone in his dim study, the glow of his laptop casting pale light across the polished mahogany desk. The technician had finally sent the restored file. His hand trembled as he clicked play. Static filled the screen first, a blur of gray and distortion. Then, the image sharpened. The nursery appeared, serene for just a moment. A faint sound crackled through the speakers, Shirley's soft gurgle, then a cough. Suddenly, the door burst open. Deborah rushed in, her face stricken with fear. She scooped the baby from the crib, cradling her close. "Breathe, baby, breathe," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. Maven leaned forward, his breath caught in his throat. Deborah worked frantically, patting Shirley's back, clearing her airway, pressing gentle compressions on her tiny chest. Then Shirley gasped, coughing weakly, life flickering back into her. "Good girl, that's it," Deborah cried, tears streaking her cheeks. She reached for the bottle on the floor, sniffed it, frowned, and in a desperate move, tasted a drop. The next moment, she staggered. Her body convulsed, hand clutching her throat. She tried to crawl back toward the baby, collapsing beside her crib, still reaching. The screen froze on that final image, Deborah's arm wrapped protectively around Shirley. Maven couldn't breathe. His vision blurred. The weight of every word he'd hurled at her came crashing down. "Oh God, what have I done?" He pressed his palms into his eyes, but the sob that tore from his chest was uncontrollable. He slammed his fist into the desk, the whiskey glass beside him shattering. Amber liquid dripped between his fingers and onto the diary that still lay open, Claire's final words staring up at him like a judgment. He saw it all now, Deborah's bruised wrist as security dragged her out, the disbelief in her voice, the hurt in her eyes. "You called her a monster," he whispered to himself. "And she was saving your child." For a long time, he sat in silence, the truth echoing through the hollow chambers of his home. Then he stood abruptly, chest heaving. "I have to find her," he muttered. But by the time Maven called every number he had, Deborah John was already gone. Rain slicked the streets of Queens as Maven Collins stepped out of the black sedan. The building before him was small and worn, peeling paint, cracked steps, a far cry from the polished marble halls he called home. He hesitated, gripping the baby blanket in his hand, then climbed the stairs and knocked. The door creaked open a few inches. Deborah John stood there, her eyes hollow, a bruise faintly visible on her wrist. Her suitcase sat by the wall, half-packed. "Mr. Collins," she said quietly, voice flat. "You shouldn't be here." He swallowed hard. "I came to say I'm sorry." Her gaze flicked to his face, unreadable. "For calling me a killer?" He flinched. "For not seeing you. For not believing you." Deborah stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was sparse, just a couch, a small crib, and an open Bible on the table. She sat, crossing her arms tightly. "You think an apology fixes what you broke? I lost my job, my reputation, my peace. All because you saw me and thought less." Her words hit like blows. Maven stood there, rain still dripping from his coat, unable to meet her eyes. "I saw the footage," he whispered. "You saved her, Deborah. You saved my daughter." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she said nothing. "I didn't want to believe what they said about me," she murmured finally. "But when you looked at me that day, I knew. You saw guilt before you saw truth." Maven nodded, shame burning through him. "You're right. I let fear speak louder than facts." Silence filled the small room. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. As he turned to leave, something slipped from his coat pocket, the corner of Shirley's baby blanket. Deborah bent down to pick it up, her hands trembling as she pressed it to her chest. "She still cries for you," Maven said gently. "Every night." Deborah closed her eyes, a single tear tracing her cheek. "Tell her I'll always love her," she whispered. Maven opened his mouth to reply, but his phone buzzed sharply. The color drained from his face as he listened. He looked up at Deborah, voice low. "Rachel's gone. She's fled the city." The news came early one morning, a phone call from Detective Harris. "We've got her," he said. "Rachel Moore. Picked up at a bus terminal in Newark." Maven's pulse quickened. Hours later, he sat behind the glass of the interrogation room, watching Rachel's calm facade begin to crack. The detective's voice was steady. "Why did you do it, Rachel?" Rachel's hands trembled. "She took everything," she hissed. "Your trust, your praise, everything that used to be mine. I just wanted her gone." Maven's stomach turned. Rachel looked up at the mirror, knowing he was on the other side. "You replaced me with her," she spat. "The maid who didn't know her place." Her voice broke. "I didn't mean to hurt the child. I just wanted her to fail." When the confession was signed, Maven left the station without a word. Outside, the cold air hit him like penance. He could clear Deborah's name now, but the victory felt hollow. By evening, the news had spread across the city. Wealthy family scandal, Maid exonerated. Reporters waited at his gate, cameras flashing. Maven ignored them all. The next day, he drove to Queens again. Deborah opened the door cautiously, surprise flashing in her eyes. "She confessed," Maven said simply. "You were right." Deborah's lips trembled, but she didn't smile. "That doesn't give me my peace back." "I know," he said softly. "But I'd like to try." He handed her an envelope. Inside was an offer, not employment, but guardianship. Full rights to care for Shirley as her legal caregiver. Deborah looked up sharply. "You don't need to do this." "I do," he said. "Forgiveness isn't something I can demand. But if I can rebuild what I destroyed, let me." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Forgiveness isn't a favor you can buy, Mr. Collins." "Then let me earn it," he replied, his tone almost pleading. Silence hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Later that night, Maven sat beside Shirley's crib, the baby restless and feverish. Her tiny hand clutched at her blanket as she whimpered softly through her dreams. Then, in the quiet, she breathed one word that made his heart twist. "Deba." The call came just after midnight. "Her fever's rising," Maven said, his voice cracking. "She keeps calling your name." Within the hour, Deborah was at the Collins estate again. The guards hesitated at first, old habits die hard, but Maven himself met her at the door. "Please," he whispered. "She needs you." Deborah stepped into the nursery, her heart aching at the sight. Shirley's tiny face was flushed, her breath shallow. Maven stood back as Deborah sat on the edge of the crib, humming softly. The tune was the same one she used to sing while folding laundry, gentle, familiar, safe. "Shh. Deba's here, my love," she whispered, stroking the child's damp curls. Moments later, as though responding to the sound of her voice, Shirley's trembling stopped. Her breathing steadied. The fever broke. Maven turned away, tears slipping down his face. "She's always known where home was," he murmured. From that night on, everything began to change. The Collins household, once cold and divided, started to feel human again. Maven replaced rigid protocols with compassion. He dismissed the remaining staff who had whispered cruelty, and he personally apologized to each worker Deborah had trained. A month later, newspapers announced a new initiative, the John Collins Trust for Child Safety, a foundation dedicated to protecting children and caregivers from neglect and injustice. Maven named it in Deborah's honor. When she saw the headline, she wept quietly, unsure whether it was gratitude or disbelief that moved her. One evening, as snow fell outside, Maven found Deborah by the fireplace. Shirley slept in her arms, her little hand curled around Deborah's finger. "You could have died for her," Maven said softly. Deborah smiled faintly, her eyes on the child. "I almost did. But she's worth it." He looked at her for a long moment, something in him finally unclenching. For the first time in months, his smile came without guilt. Later that night, after laying Shirley in her crib, Deborah returned to her room. The warmth of reconciliation lingered in her chest, until she saw the small folded note on her pillow. Her heart skipped. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message chilling in its simplicity. "Some debts are never forgiven." The mysterious note unsettled Maven, its words gnawing at the fragile peace that had only just begun to bloom. Within days, he traced it to a former driver, an ex-employee who'd been dismissed quietly after Rachel's arrest. When confronted, the man stammered, confessing he'd stolen fragments of Rachel's written confession, hoping to blackmail Maven for money. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone," the man insisted. "I just thought you'd pay to keep it quiet." Maven's anger flared, but it faded as quickly as it came. "No," he said quietly. "I've lived in silence long enough." He handed the evidence to the authorities himself, determined that no shadow of deceit would linger over his home again. Yet, walking back through the corridors of his mansion, he understood something deeper. The real revelation wasn't about Rachel or her accomplices. It was about him. He had once believed wealth could protect him from loss, control could shield him from pain, and prejudice was truth disguised as instinct. But Deborah, through her grace, her forgiveness, her quiet strength, had exposed a different truth. What shattered him wasn't betrayal, it was realizing how blind he'd been to real goodness when it stood right before him. By the time spring arrived, the Collins estate was unrecognizable. The walls that had once echoed with grief now carried the laughter of a child. The gardens were alive again, tulips swaying in the soft wind. Deborah sat beneath a blooming magnolia tree, humming the same lullaby that had once filled the nursery. Shirley toddled at her feet, giggling, chasing after petals that fell like confetti. Maven joined them, his once impeccable suit jacket now traded for a rolled-up shirt and bare hands that had learned how to plant things instead of just own them. He stood for a moment, watching Deborah cradle his daughter, their daughter, in all the ways that mattered. "You're not the help anymore, Deborah," he said quietly. "You're home." Deborah looked up, her eyes shining with quiet peace. Shirley turned, wobbling on her small feet, and reached toward Deborah. Her tiny voice broke the air in a single, perfect word. "Mama." Maven turned away, tears welling, not from sorrow, but from grace. Sunlight poured through the nursery windows, golden and warm. Where there had once been chaos and cold, there was now life. Thank you for watching till the end. Click subscribe and let me know the lessons you learned in the comment below, and turn on the notification bell because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it.